Thank you all for joining us today for part one of our three-part series on COVID-19 and mobility. The intent of this series is to provide you with information regarding COVID-19's impact on the mobility industry, as well as key considerations as we navigate through this rapidly changing environment. My name is Taryn Kramer, and I lead Sirva's Global Advisory Services practice. I'm joined today by John O'Connell, who leads Sirva's Global Supply Chain function. Sirva has identified 6 areas of focus and consideration, and today's discussion will focus on enhanced support and supplier impact. As an overview, the 6 areas that we've identified are enhanced support, which we'll dive into, cash flow challenges specific to the cash flow challenges that organizations and employees alike may experience as a result of the pandemic, mobility process timeline delays, so areas where there may be a delay in the delivery of services specific to the relocation, potential unplanned costs, again here for both the organization and the employee as they navigate through potential relocation to a temporary location for parking or back to the home location temporarily. Supplier impact, which again we'll dive into, and mobilization, which is really when we come out on the other end of this, how are organizations going to manage the process of getting back on track for business as usual? Enhanced support can also be referred to as duty of care. The current situation has raised questions and obligations for organizations regarding the additional care services that can and should be provided to employees in 2 distinct categories. The first is employees who have already relocated. The second is those who are somewhere in the life cycle of their relocation. We've identified some of these support items that should be considered by all organizations. For employees who have completed their relocation to an impacted area, the response will likely depend on current and predicted conditions. Additional support may be required to travel back to their home location or a temporary parking location. Does your organization have a travel group in place to support travel bookings and reimbursements, or does your organization require support from an external provider? Employees may need alternate accommodation in the event that they have to vacate their current property or are in need of housing in their temporary parking location. Assistance may also be required to transport or board pets, often dependent on the pet policy of the accommodation that they live in. Organizations may also opt to suspend payment of host-specific allowances such as cost of living payments and per diems while the employee is in their home or parking location, and may need to implement these allowances based on the temporary parking location. Employees may require assistance for full or partial shipments depending on the need or decision to relocate to their home location or a temporary parking location. Employees may also be concerned about students falling behind with education curriculum requirements, especially students who are close to graduating or in critical education years. Many schools are addressing these concerns for their entire school population through virtual or alternative schooling arrangements. Some organizations may be able to supplement these virtual or alternative options by leveraging their supply chain education partner resources and guidance. For example, the provision of supplemental online educational resources and customized education plans, even in instances where the employee may not have been eligible for education support from the outset. And finally, employees may be required to purchase or may opt to purchase safety equipment to minimize the potential risks of the virus. Your organization will need to make decisions regarding what expenses are reimbursable versus those that will be the responsibility of the employee. For employees that are somewhere in their relocation process, and depending on their circumstances, they too may require some additional support. They may need to travel elsewhere depending on where they're currently located. They may also require temporary accommodations or alternative or virtual education options. Here as well, organizations may decide to suspend host-driven payments such as cost of living allowances and per diems, and may need to implement those new allowances based on an alternate temporary host location. Looking ahead to when some of the uncertainty calms down and organizations start thinking about getting back to business as usual, some key decisions will need to be made regarding the status of the relocation. For employees who are already deployed to the host location, they will need to decide if they will return to the host location, split the family, where the employee will return to the host, but the family will remain in the home location, or if the relocation or assignment will be terminated and the employee and family will repatriate. For some organizations, these decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis or potentially based on the host location in question. Once a decision is made, the need for additional support as well as the type of support that will be provided can be determined. For employees that have not yet deployed to the host location, similar decisions will need to be made. Does a relocation proceed? Does a relocation terminate? Or does a split family situation occur where the employee continues to the host location, but the family remains in the home location? Again, here, the decision regarding the future of the relocation will drive the need for additional support and the type that should be of support that will be provided. We see this as a real opportunity for mobility leaders and teams to start thinking proactively about the needs of the business and to prepare some situation modeling regarding the impact of a particular decision. One example is of a client that we had that as soon as the virus started to impact their mobile population, they proactively reached out to their employees all over the globe to understand two important questions. First and foremost, did the employee feel safe in their particular location, and did they have a preference to relocate elsewhere to a temporary parking location or back to their home location? The second question regarded any additional support that the employee needed. The results of the survey were collated and distributed and shared with the business leaders within the organization. This enabled the business leaders to proactively understand where their employees were, what the needs of the employee were, and to make decisions regarding the additional support that should and could be provided to those employees. Organizations should also recognize that vendor pipelines will likely be stretched as businesses race to get back on track, and ensuring that the exception process is streamlined, documented, and that stakeholders are able to make quick decisions will aid in the timeline getting back to normal. One example is where travel costs potentially are higher or flight options limited following the lifting of restrictions. Relaxing any pre-booking timelines, such as a 14-day advance booking, as well as fare limitation approvals, such as fares over a particular amount needing a particular stakeholder approval, may enable faster deployment of individuals when relaxed. We'll shift gears now to focus on supplier impact. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Taryn. And certainly we have seen a considerable impact within the supply chain world in relation to COVID-19. So to start out, we can look at the initial questions and feedback we received from clients as the virus developed. The first thing we began to hear about was the topic of business continuity. Basically, many of our clients were interested in ensuring that our suppliers were prepared to support their business and that they weren't going to run into issues in terms of servicing customers' needs. Business continuity or business continuation is certainly part of our standard sourcing methodology at Sirva, and we would absolutely recommend to any of our clients that as they're selecting suppliers, they consider this as a key element of their supplier sourcing strategy. We have seen business continuation plans implemented in some areas. The methodology behind this is really quite similar to what we've undertaken at Sirva and what many organizations around the world have undertaken. Basically, we've had a number of suppliers who have gone to work from home scenarios, particularly in heavily impacted locations. Initially, the real concern on the part of our clients seemed to be our suppliers' ability to deliver service. To date, that really isn't the primary impact we've seen to the continuation of business. Essentially, our suppliers are pretty well prepared from a business continuity planning standpoint, and things have, in general, flowed pretty smoothly. We have, however, seen impact without a doubt in terms of actual service delivery. So how are the supplier services being impacted? Really, the most critical thing we've seen ties to the impact of newly imposed or frequently changing government regulations. Certainly, we've seen things shifting in many areas of the world and sometimes shifting very quickly as the situation continues to evolve. We first started to see this in terms of the shift to virtual service delivery among a couple of key services. Most notably, language training and cultural training became the first services to shift to more of a virtual delivery approach. This was actually a standard methodology already employed by our suppliers in this space, so it was really a pretty uneventful shift, really just a matter of gearing up and going a slightly different direction with some of the customers that they were already supporting. We have, however, since then seen shifting into virtual delivery for services that would not typically be delivered in this manner. For example, we have seen some cases in which it makes sense to do destination services such as home finding via virtual delivery. In cases such as this, suppliers have recorded video tours or worked with customers in other ways so that the customers don't actually have to interact face-to-face with landlords or various other suppliers that might be involved throughout the process. One of the things that's been particularly interesting and actually in some cases rewarding is to see our suppliers come forward with additional suggestions on how they may be able to provide support. For example, we had one destination services supplier who really developed and organized a custom package really designed to support individuals who are repatriated into their home country after departing from a high risk or high impact area. So essentially what this entailed was some very, very specific services that allowed the customer to wind up in temporary accommodation for 14 days where they could self-quarantine. They were able to check into the facility without any interaction with an employee at the facility. The accommodations were completely stocked with groceries and other necessities to support them during the 14 days. And even the transportation was arranged in a manner that they weren't required to interact with others as they arrived at the facility. In a similar manner, we've seen temporary housing providers open their doors or offer options to use their facilities in different ways. As I said before, many companies are moving to more of a work at home policy at this time. Many of our clients are seeing that as well. And our temporary housing providers have in some cases offered to serve as really temporary office locations for individuals who don't have a home environment that really lends itself to a home office. So essentially people could work from the temporary housing facility during the day, have a private office rather than having to work from home where it may not be possible to work without disruption. Supplier communication has been absolutely critical during the outbreak of the virus. And really we look at this from three different areas. The first is what the client or the RMC is communicating to the supplier and what discussions are taking place regarding safety protocols and best practices. We've pushed several pieces of communication out to our suppliers regarding recommendations since the outbreak of the virus. And for any cases where you're working directly with suppliers, we'd certainly recommend that you do the same thing. We've had a great deal of communication back from our suppliers, frequent updates in many cases regarding specific issues and challenges associated with different markets, or in some cases, different services, depending on the individual circumstances. We've also seen some cases where safety concerns have been highlighted, and in general, these tend to be happening more on the supplier side than the customer side. What I mean by that is suppliers have pointed out cases where they thought there could be a potential concern working with a customer if perhaps that customer came directly from a highly impacted area and neglected some of the World Health Organization guidelines or recommendations associated with self-isolation or self-quarantine. In those cases, we, of course, communicate with the supplier and with our client organizations to try to make sure we're reaching a solution that works well for everybody. We certainly don't want to put anybody at risk, but we want to make sure that we're prepared to offer great service to our customers whenever they need it. Now that I've talked a little bit about how COVID-19 is impacting suppliers, I'd like to switch into the topic of mitigation planning, talk about some of the specific steps we've undertaken at Sirva, some steps you might want to consider in your own organizations, and some efforts that our suppliers continue to display in this space. As the virus continued to grow, we implemented an internal cross-functional task force within Sirva. It's really focused on ensuring that communication flows smoothly and that information is available across all constituencies that are relevant to our organization. So that includes our own employees, it includes the clients we service, their employees, of course, and our suppliers themselves, really making sure that we're very clear on what information needs to be disseminated, who's disseminating it, and that we're on top of any additional and breaking news that comes out that we need to address at any point in time. From a supplier perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we continue to receive very frequent updates from our suppliers. And so we're publishing updates at a minimum on a daily basis. And this information goes out to our organization and often is then disseminated out to our clients. One of the unique aspects of this virus and one of the real challenges is that the epicenter continues to evolve and continues to move. Of course, we initially first heard of the outbreak in parts of Asia. As of last week, one would have said that Europe was squarely at the epicenter of things. And of course, as of now, things have evolved considerably, and the outbreak is very considerable in the United States. So as that occurs, it's really critical that we continue to publish out the supplier updates so everybody is aware of what's occurring in specific parts of the world and how it might impact service delivery. Internally, we've developed a dedicated internal mailbox for any and all COVID-19 questions. This has worked out really well so that our operations teams, our account management teams, or anyone else can contact a group that will immediately look at questions and respond to them as necessary. We've used this to reply to a lot of client-specific inquiries regarding the virus and what's occurring in different areas. And finally, our supply chain team continues to research inquiries as well and try to find options and additional solutions where perhaps traditional service delivery may not be feasible depending on the circumstances within a particular country or a particular location. So next, I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about really where we are from a current state and a future state as the virus continues to move and evolve. So if we look at this as a continuum, of course, there was the initial outbreak of the virus. The real need then was immediate response and triage. That's when we started receiving those questions I referred to about business continuation and will our suppliers be able to provide service, and what's possible in terms of helping assignees or in some cases even getting them out of a location very quickly. We've shifted to a certain degree from there, and really we're in a current state that involves essentially two different potential phases. We are in a new reality. There's no question about that. Our suppliers are working remotely. Sirva is working remotely. Many of our clients are working remotely, and this has become very much a norm for many people throughout the world. As I mentioned, there are some constraints in face-to-face service delivery. Less about whether a supplier has staff available, but much more about really what's safe and reasonable, both for your employees and for our suppliers, and also what's allowed by the government. Along with this, there is some continued triage as we respond to questions and respond to the evolving circumstances. We are starting to see a movement towards a phase 3, which is really thinking about the aftermath of what will occur as the virus finally abates and things move on from here. We've started to receive questions about potential recovery scenarios. Essentially, it's clients wanting to know, will we have suppliers available? Do we have adequate bandwidth to meet what might be a pent-up demand for services once things return to a more normal state? Certainly very valid questions. We do focus on having at least 2 suppliers available for all services at all times, sometimes even more than that. And we would absolutely suggest that our clients take that same approach and have a good backup plan in place just in case volume becomes overwhelming for the face-to-face or end-user delivery to suppliers. Again, it's a key part of our responsibilities as a supply chain management team within Sirva. So this is something we stay very focused on at all times. We're also starting to think about specifically how will we evaluate our suppliers in terms of their responsiveness and their performance during this difficult time. I will say we've been really pleased with a lot of the proactivity and the responses and the interaction with our suppliers. But of course, this is an unforeseen set of circumstances. It's a highly, highly unusual event. So we want to really give some thought to how they've responded during this time and think about how that could impact things as we go forward. We will move into a phase 4. We're not necessarily there yet. Again, we're, along with most of the world and most of the clients we talk to, we're really in that current state environment. But eventually, when we get to phase 4, the focus will be on finding opportunities out of all of this. Certainly an incredibly difficult set of circumstances, one that we hope that we won't foresee again anytime in the near future. But ultimately, we'll do an assessment of the lessons learned throughout this and really think about how we can be even more prepared next time something like this transpires, if that eventually happens. We'll, of course, work to identify potential improvement opportunities and look at what went really well during this time and what went differently. And we'll look forward to sharing that communication with our clients as we go forward. So that's a bit of an overview of where we are today from a supplier management perspective. Certainly both Taryn and I welcome any questions you have. We are here to provide any information we can, and we're grateful for the opportunity to provide support to you during this difficult time. Thanks for taking the time to listen to our comments today, and we look forward to staying connected with you as things continue to evolve.